Chinese teams further down the river were also taking a beating. Some of their efforts were reminiscent of the early days of Niagara Falls. Although their crafts were unconventional, they were still going some 400 miles ahead of the Sino-American expedition. Not far from the river, a visit with a traditional Tibetan family opened the eyes of the expeditioners to one of the hidden cultures of China's interior. The family lived as subsistence farmers and herders, raising only what they needed to feed and clothe themselves. They get by on a diet of home-grown roots and vegetables, rice and sampa, and yogurt, which they churn from yak milk. The yak is also a source of other products for the family, yielding yak butter tea and wax. When the animal dies, its meat will be consumed and its hide dried and tanned. Virtually every home has a small shrine with an altar of candles, objects of devotion, and pictures of the Dalai Lama. The family prays often, repeating their mantras, asking for the safekeeping of the Dalai Lama, and practicing the devotion of the spirit that is the central aspect of their form of Buddhism. The river has always played an important role in the lives of these hill people, a role that is carried on in an oral tradition through myths and stories. Jan Warren and her team were heading for Bataan. Because of the scarcity of roads, they had to cover over 900 miles just to advance 350 river miles. Logging is visible all over the central provinces as the demands for new housing grow with China's massive population. Still photographer Barbara Reese was both entertained and entertainer as the children marveled at her camera.
Thank you. Oh, oh.
While passing through a herding village, Tibetan horsemen, long known for their riding skills, gave an exhibition. But again, it was the camera that received most of the attention. The monasteries of Tibet and China's western provinces continue to be the focal point in rural life. It is here that devout Buddhists find the meaning and energy for living.
my assessment is that we have to, it's runnable on this hard right, but we have to be hard right, because there's no question dropping in that hole is going to hold a boat. I don't care if it's 6 boats, 7 boats, or whatever. It's just drops straight down and then just comes up and then just sits there boiling.
This awesome hole was one of the most treacherous the rafters had come upon thus far. It was one they considered at length, but after long deliberations, they decided to give it a shot.
The first big 4-boat rapid, we call 4-boat rapid, the diamond rig setup that Ron put together, we weren't sure how it was going to work. There was basically 1 oarsman on each side and then the 2 oarsmen in the back. And we had to have some maneuverability. That was the only way we were going to get down the river. Awesome power of Yangtze River was tossing our big 36-foot craft around like it was a toy. And this had a dramatic effect on the people. There was no question about it. By the time my boat was turned underneath the other boats, there was definitely apprehension and fear created by what had happened to us. They were realizing the power of the Yangtze River. They were feeling the power of the Yangtze River. And I don't think that fear had ever left the expedition, and now it was more prevalent than ever.
Nearly all the rapids in the last couple of days never got filmed because the rafts were out of control. They couldn't stop to let cameramen off and sort of organize a shooting session. So they careened down the river, and I would start out ahead in the morning, scouting and radioing back, and eventually they would catch up to me and pass me by, and they'd disappear down the river, and I wouldn't see them again, sometimes for hours. On that last day in the rapids, I was ahead scouting, and I got to what I could tell was a substantial rapid. I couldn't see it because it disappeared around a corner, but I could see water spitting up into the air, and I could hear the roar, and I could see the tops of trees down lower. And so I got on the radio and I said, hey, there's a big rapid here, and I can't see how serious it is. There's an eddy here on the left, and you guys need to try and catch it so we can scout it together. I knew they were coming right behind me. I knew they'd been catching up to me and that they were almost on top of me, and that I wasn't going to have a chance to take a good look at the rapid before they got to me. And a voice came over the radio. It was Ansel Nance, and I could tell he was kind of irritated. So clearly he was passing on Ken Warren's irritation with me, once again saying, hey, you guys need to take a look at a rapid. I think Ken was kind of done with scouting at that point. I think he just wanted to tear on downriver and come what may, you know. But I said, look, I can't tell how serious this rapid is. You guys need to pull over and scout. There's an eddy large enough on river left. So I see him coming around the corner, maybe a quarter mile upriver, and they're stroking. They're stroking towards the left side where I am and where the eddy's going to be. And it looks like they're going to make it. And then all of a sudden they stop. And they're just drifting with the current, but now they're sort of out of the center of the water because they started to make the move towards the eddy and then they stopped. And I had the radio up next to me, and I think my jaw probably was open, and because here they go, they're going to go into this rapid. And I remember seeing this kind of looks of resignation on people's faces and fear, and because they weren't in the center of the current now, there was this giant rock in the current but sticking up out of the water, and it was probably like a Volkswagen bus on end, and those rafts got pushed up against it, and the front raft went all the way up on top of this rock and sat there, and the other rafts were in the current, and they kind of just tugged it back off, and then they disappeared around the corner, gone into this white roar. By the time I could get up to where I could look down the rapid, I couldn't see them anymore. They were gone. So I caught up to them, I don't know, maybe an hour later or so, and they were pulled over on the side in a relatively calm stretch of the river. And this is what I saw. I saw the one raft folded underneath the other three. Well, the kind of force it would take to get that raft, to fold under the other three, and then you see the floor is ripped. I mean, maybe it got ripped when they went up on top and got dragged off. I don't really know. I found out later that a couple of guys had been tossed from the rafts, and by pure luck or prayers being answered or whatever it was, they washed back to the rafts and got back on board. When I paddled up and I saw this raft folded under the other three and the ripped floor and the looks on people's faces, I was like, holy crap, this is a big deal. And I think maybe people saw the look on my face and thought it was fear, but I was just kind of solemn, like, oh my God, I never really thought that the Yangtze stretches that we did were all that difficult. Yes, they were big, and yes, there were places where you could get into really serious trouble and get killed. But I felt like a group of really good kayakers would go down there and just have a good time. So they made camp there where the rafts pulled over, and now we've got this big rip in the floor. We've got other damage to the equipment. I was told by Dan Dominy that Ken Warren had blamed me because I told him to try to catch an eddy. And I said, well, why did you guys stop rowing for the eddy? And he said that Warren told him to stop. So he blamed me, and I think people were pretty, they were fearing for their lives at this point, understandably so. And we made camp there, and I remember Warren saying he wasn't going to go anywhere until helicopter support showed up. I knew we were getting low on food, so there we all are sitting at what later would be called 5-day camp. The people that stayed there the longest spent 5 days. When Ken told me he wasn't going to go anywhere till a rescue helicopter came in, I thought, well, in my mind, that wasn't going to happen, and we were just going to run completely out of food, and then what? So I told Ken I was going to paddle downriver and try to send help back with food and repair kits for the rafts. And I had sat down with the Chinese the night before and looked at their maps, and I could see that the shoreline was going to start to get pretty steep, and so that was a concern to me. So I paddled down to the top of the next rapid. It wasn't very far, and I sat there for an hour. I just sat there by myself thinking about what my plan was and whether or not it was going to help the group. And I kind of realized that if I ran the river down to the next resupply point and said, these guys need help. There's no road along the river. They're not going to be able to drive up and, deliver supplies. Otherwise, they'd already be there watching us. So how are they going to know where to go? For me personally, sure, I would make it down to the next resupply point and I could raise the alarm, but for the rest of the group, that wasn't going to be of any use. And so I decided that instead of paddling out, I was going to hike out.